Okay, in this demonstration, I want to show you how I rendered these little 3D containers. This is for a company, a small company that's located near me, and they produce these containers. And I'm trying to show them how I would mock up a container with a label for them. I'm going to be using Adobe Illustrator, and I'm going to be revolving this in Adobe 3D. I'm going to be applying a graphic to one of the surfaces, and I'm going to show you how I can change the lid color. So that is the exercise. This is the final piece. I'm going to first stop over onto this file and show you that what I've done was I've put together a label. This is the label that I've created, and again, it means nothing. It's just so that I have a label. I went in and I looked at different labels that went on these, and I just picked off information that I thought would be the proper information to go on a label like this, and I just whipped up a label so that I would have something that I could apply to my graphic. Now, what's important for you to know about this is that you need to take this label and you need to put it into your symbols panel. Oh, and by the way, the panels that I'm going to be using today is the layers panel, the colors or swatches panel, I should say, the symbols, and the appearance. Those are the four panels that I will be using here, and the appearance panel is currently open. Let me open up the symbols for a second, and you can see that I created a symbol, and I'm just calling this snap label because it's snap tight. So it's snap label, and all you do to make this symbol is you create or you select the element. Make sure you got the element selected, and you just drag it in, and it will automatically become a symbol, and this will convert to a symbol. And when you see the little X in the middle of it, that is telling you that it's a symbol. You get a choice of what kind of symbols to make, the kind of symbols that you want. The kind of symbol that you want for this is a graphic symbol. I think one of them is a flash or a movie clip. I think it's a movie clip and a graphic. And I think what you want is the graphic. Okay. If you want to edit this, all you have to do is double click on this, and you can see it's opened up inside, and double click it again, and you can come in here and you can start editing any of this that you want. If I wanted to change the color, I'm not going to do this, but that's basically how you do it. And you follow your little breadcrumb trail out of here, and now you're back into your symbol. So that's the symbol. You need the symbol in order to do this. Then I'm going to move over to this one here. This is my sample. Oh, and I wanted to show you this. This is something that I also do, and I also recommend for you. When you open up any of these panels, this is the symbol panel opened up, you can see that certain default symbols come up. These are just basic symbols that are in my symbol panel. When I create artwork like this, I tend to always do the same thing, and that is I kind of wash out or clean out my symbol panel or whatever panel I'm working with, like my swatches panel. I'll show you that one in a minute. I always clean these out, and what I do generally is I come up here, this is my little drop down menu, and I click on it, and I come down and I select all unused. And when I let go, all the ones that are not being used in my project get selected. I hit the garbage can, and I hit delete selected, yes, and now what I end up with is just the symbol that's in there that I intend to use on this project. Now, if I had 3 symbols in there, I would make sure that all 3 of those symbols were put in there, but in this particular case, for this particular project, I only have 1 symbol. And that's what I generally do. Now, let's take a look at the swatches panel, and you can see the same things occurring in the swatches panel. This is what a default swatches panel looks like. And when you are working on a project like this, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you have the colors that you're working with and not all these other colors. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having them there, but it can be awfully confusing because now I have a particular red that I'm using here and a particular blue that I'm using here, and I got all these colors, and you kind of get wondering as to what you're using. So I generally will go in and I will remove all the unused colors when I work on a specific project, and this is specific enough that I will do it. So again, you come here, click, come down to select all unused, and then you hit the garbage can, delete them all. They all basically go away, except there's a couple that are persistent and will not go away. And so I click on this one. First of all, I deselect everything, because if you don't, what will happen is it'll throw the color into it. So I select this, and I hit delete. And yes, I hit this, and hit delete. Don't need it. And hit yes. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that right there is my cap red. That right there is my container blue. Those are the colors that I created to make my little sample. So this color right here is a meaningless color. I hit delete on it and delete it. So now what I am left with here is I'm left with none, registration, white, black, my cap red, and my container blue. That is the way that you should work when you're working on this stuff. It makes it so much easier for you. So again, you don't do this immediately, but as you're working through your process, when you create these things, it's a very good idea to organize your panels to make sure that you get the full benefit from the panels. You can do the same thing in any other program that you're working with. If you're working in Photoshop, you would do the same thing. If you are working in Adobe InDesign, you would do the same thing. You could even do this in Dreamweaver or Muse. You just basically set up the colors that you're working with and limit it to that, because again, I'm working with very specific colors. I really am not going to be editing this label in here, but I got to tell you, let me go back to this for a second and show you. If I wanted to, I'm sorry, it's a layers panel, wrong panel, symbols panel. If I wanted to, I could literally double click on this, and you see now I can go back in and actually edit this thing right in this program. Now I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to just show you that you have the ability to edit this thing anytime, anytime that you want. Alright, so my goal here is I'm going to show you how to render this. Originally I had a container that I used as a sample, and that container sample is gone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually use this piece here as my sample, and I'm going to show you how to render from this. So let me set that up and show you how I do that. Right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to work in the layers panel. So this guy is on a layer. Let me move it more towards the middle a little bit. Right about there would be good. Okay, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lock this layer. So I put the lock on. Now this layer is locked. I can't edit this on this layer. I'm going to create a new layer, and this is going to be my work layer. And on this layer I'm going to come in and I'm going to render or show you how to render the elements that you need to create this object. Let me just quickly show you what they are so that you have a pretty good idea of this. Alright, so I'm going to select this layer, and to do this I'm going to open up the appearance panel, and I'm going to select these two objects, and you see where it says 3D Revolve Map? Okay, this is the appearance panel records everything that you've done to these objects. So by clicking the eyeball on that, I want you to see what happens. I click the eyeball on it, and now if I deselect this, you see what happens? My two objects. These are the two objects that I used to render my 3D form. So I'm just quickly showing you this. So I select these again, and I click the eyeball back on my 3D render, and my 3D render comes back. So that's what I'm ultimately going to be doing here. Okay? So I'm going to go back to my layers panel again, lock my layer, and I'm going to come in here, and the first thing I want to do is I want to go to the view menu, and I want to bring my rulers forward. So I'm going to show my rulers, view, rulers, show rulers. With my rulers out, what I can now do is I can create a guide. And I want to basically put a guide in the middle of this object so that I can only render half of it, because I only need to render half of it to make this a 3D revolved shape. So I'm going to come over here, grab my guide, and I'm going to bring guide out. Oh, I got to get on the right layer, sorry. Got on the work layer, and drag my guide out and put it right about in the middle. Again, does it have to be exactly in the middle? What does it matter? I'm just demonstrating this. So there is my guide. It's in the proper position. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit so that we can get a closer look at this. And I'm going to render my two objects. The important thing to know is that when you're working on this, let me have a second to get my battery. There we go. Okay. So when I do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I have the stroke forward, because in the end I need my elements to have a stroke on it. And what I might do to begin with here to make this a little easier for me is, let me hit cancel. I may go in and I may change the actual stroke to black. There. So I've changed the stroke to black on this. The reason I'm doing that is so that I can see the difference between the elements that I'm about to render. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get the pen tool, and I'm going to come over here to the intersection of that shape and that guide, and I'm going to click and I'm going to place a point. I'm going to come all the way over to about here, and I'm going to click and I'm going to place a point. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to move over to about here, and I'm going to click drag to create that corner, because there's kind of like a curved corner right there. Then I'm going to come back over that anchor point and click it, and by doing that I will retract that control arm, and I will now go straight down to that corner, and I will click and I place an anchor point. And I didn't drag it, so I don't have a curve point, so I'm going to move straight over to here, and to get a nice straight line I'm going to hold the shift key down and click. So now I double click on this to finish that little shape. Okay, and then I come up and I click on my regular selection tool, and I can come to my layers panel. I can hide my background layer, and you can see the basic shape that I did. Now what I might want to do is I might want to come in there and I might want to clean those little points up. The way I do that is I get the direct selection tool and I click on that point, and then I just take that control handle and I make that control handle work a little bit nicer, and it's still a little bit off, so I'm going to bring it down a little bit, and that looks much better. Now again, I could probably bring it down a little bit more. I don't want you to think that I'm going to go into the detail that I went into to create the original, because again I spent more time with this, but this is good enough. This will give you an idea of what we're doing. So let's go View, Fit Artboard and Window, and there's your first element. That's the first thing I'm going to do. So now I'm going to come back here and I'm going to bring back the model that I'm working with. Since I am finished with that cap, I want to hide the cap. Now I unlock the layer for a second, and these are two objects that are actually on layer 1. So if you open this up, you'll see that there are two subgroup layers that I'm using to make this object. Since I'm done with the first object, you can see it right there. That's the cap. I'm going to hide the eyeball on that, and now you see what I got. I got basically my my container showing. So that's what I want to do next, is I want to focus on that container. So for the second, I'm going to hide that. Now I'm going to come back in, close this, and lock it again. Then I'm going to come up and I'm going to zoom in here, get nice and tight, and I'm going to render this object right here. So to do that, again, I get the pen tool, I come over to my intersection of my guide and my model, click, place a point. I come way over here to that point right there, click. Then I come around and I click and drag and I create that little corner. I want to go back up and I want to change the nature of that anchor point. I don't want it to be a curve point. I want to make it a corner point. So I click and I retract that control handle. I come down to that point right there and I click. Then I move over to about here and I want to create that inner curve. So I'm going to click, hold, and drag to create that inner curve. Get it to about where I want it. And it's sometimes a little, there, I got it. There's my inner curve. Now again, I'm going to click on that control handle, or that anchor point, I'm sorry, and change that to a corner point. So I get a nice long straight line. Go all the way down to here, click. Then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to make my complex curve. Come to about the middle of it, and I'm going to, it's jumpy a little bit. Yeah, click like that. Then I'm going to click that anchor point again to change the curve. Come over to here and click and drag, and I got my complex curve. That's close enough for our purposes. And then I'll come over here and I will click, and now I've created my shape. Oh, double click it to end it. And then come up here and get my regular selection tool, and there is my shape. Now, of course, this would need a little bit of work over here, and to do that, again, what you do is you zoom in here like this, and you get your direct selection tool, because the direct selection tool allows you to work with individual points. So I would then play with this point until I got that point, and maybe I'd have to move that point a little bit. That point might have to come over a little bit to get it to look where it needs, look right the way it needs to look. Bring it down a little bit, right to about there. And I would just continue playing with this until I got something. Whoops, let me get back to that point. I would keep playing with this until I got something that I felt looked right. And again, I probably didn't do this exactly the right way. That's why I'm having the problems I'm having with it. But that's all right. Again, the important thing is that you get the general idea of how I make this. I would probably fix this corner. But again, I got enough going with it that you can get the idea of how to do this. So let's go to the window menu and let's fit artboard and window. I'm sorry, view, fit artboard and window. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to change the color of my elements. So get the regular selection tool, select that element, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to give it this blue right here. That's the container blue. Then what I'm going to do is go back to my layers panel again, and actually I don't need to unlock that. I locked the other one. That's what it is. I'm going to hide that background layer. Okay, so now I have my my cap. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to put the cap color on it. Now here's a very important point. If you take a look at your layers, since I worked on this, there are my two elements. Since I worked on this, you'll see that my my container is higher up than my cap. And what that means is that I created the path for the cap first. Now the cap is actually going to go on the outside of the container. It's going to cover the container, capping it, closing it. So I have to take that path layer, which is the cap layer, and I have to move it up until it's in front of, like that. Now it's in front of my container, and that's the way it should look. So this is ultimately what I'm doing. I'm getting ready to now revolve these two shapes, and that's how you do this. So I select the shapes. I can do this one at a time, or I could do them together. I'm just going to do them together. Make it a little bit quicker, but you can do them one at a time. So with both of these elements selected, I'm going to go up to the Effect menu. I'm going to go to 3D. I'm going to go Extrude and Bevel, and I click on Extrude and Bevel, and I'll move this over so that you can see what's going on. And all you have to do to see the revolve is you hit Preview. And oops, I'm sorry, I hit the wrong one. What am I doing? Extrude and Bevel. I want to revolve. Effect 3D Revolve. There we go. I hit the wrong one. Preview. And there it is. It's revolved. So that's all it takes to revolve this thing. I mean, you really don't have to do very much. Now, you can go in and you can play with the surface lighting. You can move the lighting around and change the condition of the lighting so it looks different. It's up to you to decide how you want it to look. You can come in and add another light if you want, and you know, make this thing look as interesting as you want. This is part of what you could do. The other thing that's really nice about this is you could come in here and they have different views. Like for instance, here's the front view. That's what it looks like when you just sit it looking straight at you from the front. Then you can come back here and you can go to a off-axis front. That's the one that is default. You can use this element right here, which shows you the different surfaces. I believe this dark blue one is the front surface. So I can take that front surface and I can change the nature or the position of that front surface. Now, one of the problems that you encounter with this is these two elements can go a little bit wacky on you when you do this. So you got to be a little careful with it. And they will move a little bit. So I'm just going to set this thing to off-axis front. There. And now I basically got it the way I want it. Now, the one final thing that I want to show you here is how to map art onto the surface, and that is how you apply your label to this. So you go over to here to map art, and you click on map art, and you get this little area that shows you the surfaces. And there are 19 surfaces on this object, and you've got to keep that in mind when you do this. So when you are going to go through your surfaces, you're going to start clicking, and you're going to start seeing something happen in here. You're going to see this little red highlight come up, and it's showing you the surfaces that is currently selected. And you just keep going until you find the surface that you want. Now, unfortunately, there is a back surface to this object and a front surface, and sometimes people get confused. This, I believe, is the back surface. And the reason I say that, it's number 7 of number 19. So I would imagine that that's the back surface of this. And if I put the label on, I'd have to turn this thing completely around in order to see the label. So I'm just going to keep clicking through my surfaces until I see what I believe is the front surface. And I'll show you that, what that looks like in a second. Keep going, keep going, keep going. That right there number 16 of 19 is what I believe is the front surface of my revolved object. That is where I want to place my graphic, which is the label. To do that, you go up to in the map area, you have symbols. Right now it's set to none. I'm going to click on this guy, and I'm going to go down, and if you remember, I cleaned out my symbol panel, so the only thing that you see other than none is the snap label. This is why I do it. It makes it easier for me to work with. So now I just click on snap label, and snap label comes in. But the snap label comes in very big. You can see it's there, it's just too big. So what you want to do is you want to get it to fit within this area right here. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to bring it in to where about it should be, and I'm going to start making this a little smaller. I'm holding the shift key down to constrain it, and I'm going to start making it smaller until I get it to a size which will probably be able to fit on there. And I'm close, but I'm not quite there yet. Shift, and I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. And there you go. I've got it on there. Then once you get it on there, you can kind of move it around and get it to where you want it to be. You know, you can make it. You got to keep carefully make sure it doesn't get too close to the edges, or it'll cut off. That's what. And probably is a little bit too big still. So let me make it just a touch smaller. Make sure I got it on there. Okay. Now I'm going to bring it in. There, it's on well, except that I probably want to get it a little more centered. So I'm going to move it over till it's a little bit more visually centered on here, and I went low again. So again, I made this as big as I could make it. I'd say that's probably good enough for our purposes. Okay, so there it is. I hit OK on this, and then I hit OK on this, and then when I come in here and I deselect, I'm going to go View Guides, Hide Guides. And there is my rendered 3D object with the label applied to it. And as I say, I mean, technically there's not a lot of effort on your part. It's just a matter of knowing where things are and how to do things. Now, one other thing I want to show you that I think is really great about this is that I can, if I want, at any time, I can change the color of my 3D form. And I think this is probably a little low. Let me try moving this up a little bit. That's a little too. I probably want it right there. I guess that was right. By selecting this, you'll see I can select these two objects. Okay, I'm going to select a cap. I got the cap selected. And if I want, I can come in here and I can double click on the stroke, and I can come in here and I can change the color to say blue and hit OK. And there I've just instantaneously changed the color of that lid from red to blue. I really think this is a lot of fun. I think it's very easy in the end to do. You can't do 3D everything, but you can do 3D a lot of things. And as I say, I created this, and here's what I did with it. I just basically showed it in two slightly different views, and I think you should give it a try.